need to have a sign-off from the board to actually start the sustainability journey. Really often that means, I don't know what my footprint is. Is it 1,000 tons? Is it 1 million tons? How big has our journey to be, right? We basically want to provide the tools to get these journeys kicked off as easy as possible. They go to the board and say like, guys, if we don't do anything, we have to spend this and this amount on credits. We have this and this kind of footprint. We're also going to launch a tool, a marginal abatement cost analysis. So it basically shows them based on their industry, what are the low-hanging fruits for emission reductions. Yeah, we're really trying to give them the tools for free to make a case to get started.
Yo, what is good, ReFi fam? John here with another episode of ReFi Podcast. Today, I have a chance to sit down with Adrian Wons, the CEO and founder of Senken, a digital carbon marketplace that's connecting buyers with high-quality, nature-based carbon credits to fill their climate commitments beyond what they are able to do, decarbonizing and reducing emissions internally. I met Adrian in 2021, just as the regenerative finance movement was kicking off. We were both fellows at Kernel, and we were starting this epic journey, exploring how Web3 can finance climate action at scale. In today's episode, we hear Adrian's journey navigating the tumultuous confluence of both the carbon market and the Web3 market, and ultimately how he has listened to the signals of his customers, both on the buyer side and on the supply side, to do what they need to remove all barriers possible and create a delightful user experience that really works to engender trust in this instrument of a carbon credit to finance climate solution and protect our most precious natural habitats. We wade through quite a bit of water around the carbon market, its current state, the evolution, some of the challenges that we're facing. And this is a great episode for anyone interested in this instrument who wants to dig deeper and also understand the kind of grit that it takes for a founder to persevere through market cycles, get through onto the other side, and recognize that they are making a meaningful contribution to this complex cascading crisis that we face with climate, biodiversity collapse, social inequity, and everything else in between. I hope you enjoy this show. I definitely learned a lot speaking to Adrian, and I'm really looking forward to seeing their journey unfold in the years to come. They really are a pivotal pioneer in this space of financing climate action, and I think you'll learn a lot from the show. If you enjoy, leave us a review. Always great to hear from you. Thanks for your time, and let us know what you think. Adrian, good morning, man. It's been ages. How you doing?
John, thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you?
Mate, loving life, sunny Lisbon, surfing, enjoying the end of the year. It's been an absolutely wild ride, 2023. And very curious to hear what you guys have been up to, man. It seems like you've made some serious strides at Senken over the last year and the last 2 years. I'd be really grateful to start off just an introduction to what you're building at Senken for those who don't know what you're up to so far.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, I started Senken, I think it was a little bit more than 2 years ago, like in August. And with Senken, we, from the beginning actually, today we had like a strategy reset, and I basically just copy and pasted the strategy slides from 2 years ago into today's presentation, just with a new branding that says we just want to create a really trustworthy marketplace to make it easier to access carbon credits around the world. And funnily, nothing changed. We're still a marketplace. We still want to make the market trustworthy through probably a lot of use of technology. And we always had this big, hairy, audacious goal, which is just funneling $10 billion into the climate market until 2030. And nothing changed, which is crazy because a lot has changed over the last 2 years, right?
Yeah, totally, man. Super interesting. So kind of a strong foundation that you've built upon, but you've had to take quite a bit of a trajectory to get there. I'm curious to get just a high level, like where did this begin? What was the catalyst for you starting Senken? What was really the drive that said, okay, I'm going to do this thing, create this marketplace?
Yeah, so my background was basically in two different fields. On one hand, I'm educated in computational fluid dynamics in the wind energy space. So basically, I calculated a lot like how the wind streams go through the turbines and so on. So really early I had a lot of touch points of sustainability. But then actually started the blockchain department for Ernst & Young in Germany. Something completely different, just because I had a passion on the side. And, with simulating a lot, you have a lot of server capacity. And then I was mining back then in university. And then I basically switched from sustainability into the blockchain space, advising companies on mostly big corporates on, for instance, how to make their supply chain more transparent. So basically always had these two industries, which were also like two fields which I'm really passionate about, Web3 and sustainability. And then how it actually started was after EY, I founded a research institute for sustainable innovation for a German university. And with that, I came down to South Africa to do like a research project on figuring out how farmers are incentivized to switch to regenerative agriculture. And all of them basically said there are two things. On one hand, subsidies, but there are no subsidies in South Africa. And the other thing are carbon markets, but they're not working. And I was like, hey, why are they not working? Yeah, well, either the money doesn't arrive or it's also hard to show buyers of carbon credits that we actually did what we promised to do. And then there are just a lot of people taking advantage of that north-south connection, because a lot of the carbon projects are in the global south, but most of the buyers are in the global north. So for us then, we did this research, and then the catalyst moment was that we found one of the projects, and I always repeat that because it's a crazy example, being sold for $15 it was a German startup, but the project developer actually only got $3. So basically $12 lost without any impact. And it just went to intermediaries, everyone taking a cut. But no one knew it because there's no transparency. It was all over the counter through emails or phone and so on. And that was basically when I then was at the point where I was like, damn, that's exactly what I did at EY with blockchain. We tried to make supply chains more transparent because there are also a lot of problems. Why can't we take that same kind of technology and system that we had there and apply it to carbon markets? And that was basically the start of Senken, where we just said, hey, we want to make the carbon market transparent and trustworthy, because even in the South, everyone thinks this is one of our best tools to fill that gap of climate finance, and it helps this specific farmer also to switch to regenerative agriculture. But it's not working at the moment. And that's when we said more than 2 years ago, like, hey, let's start Senken, because it's really needed in the space.
Yeah, totally. And you're obviously seeing the impact of the loss of those capital flows and what's happening on the ground in the soil, in these ecosystems as a result of the money not flowing to where it needs to go. And then on the buyer side, them not having the confidence that the money's going to the right place. And so there's this whole erosion of trust. And I was also very, very enthusiastic about the role of Web3 in facilitating this exchange of value in a trustworthy way. But as we've both seen, everything has been so much more complicated and challenging and difficult and volatile than I think any of us expected. I'd be curious to get, just like a high-level overview of maybe where you guys are today in terms of the traction that you've achieved. I know that you've navigated the waters of Web 2 versus Web 3 according to your customers, your suppliers and your buyers, as you should as a company. But give us a quick snapshot and then maybe unroll the journey of how you got here a little bit and some of the key learnings along the way.
Yeah, so basically for a climate or carbon startup in the Web3 space, you basically had two super volatile markets, which is the Web3 market and the carbon market. And it feels like they are basically being multiplied by each other. And that ends up in a Web3 carbon startup, which is like just a crazy roller coaster ride, right?
That's what we're here for, man.
We're probably going to talk about it later, but I aged 10 years in two because of these two volatile markets. So we, as a startup, we actually started seeing that kind of problem that I just mentioned before. And in the beginning, we said we want to solve it, and we actually looked at a couple of things, what could help us. And one thing was Web3. But in the first 3 months, that was not really the core of our offering. And then it was back then when I got into this kernel accelerator, where we also met, right? Where I was like, oh, this is an amazing accelerator. Let's just see if this kind of idea works really well in a Web3 environment. And that's also where I basically then built like the first prototype, which was more often, NFT marketplace for carbon credits almost, I would say. So people who know OpenSea for the NFT space, I actually, the very first click dummy, I just almost took OpenSea design because I'm not a design expert, put it into Figma and then put it in or like adjusted it for carbon credits. So I really had that vision of, hey, OpenSea basically made it really, really easy to access the NFT standard, ESC 721. Why can't we do the same for carbon credits, which has also been, really hard to access for the outside world. And then I really fell in love with the Web3 idea of it, right? Because a lot of the principles of Web3, but also the Web3 movement, like open access, equality, transparency, and democracy, and so on, feels really fitting to carbon markets. So it's all things that carbon markets actually need in order to evolve and being the strong tool that we all wanted to be. So I was that was the honeymoon phase, I would say. I was like, amazing, there's so much potential, and it just fits. And then, of course, having a big community, we were all working on similar things, right? You with Toucan back then, and of course there were other amazing projects that either also came out of kernel or just from that overall ReFi movement. With the ReFi orb, right? I asked you like, hey, where do you have this amazing orb from? Can you give it to me as well? And then the ReFi orb was born, right?
That was it, man. You're the OG ReFi orb holder.
Yeah, shame, right? It was a good time, and I was like, this can actually work. And as you mentioned before, it's not as easy as we all thought it is. Why isn't it as easy? Like, I think a couple of things that then happened. The problem on one hand with a lot of the Web3 space is that a lot of the OG Web3 people came from more of the speculation kind of space. If I take the Web3 or like blockchain and Web3 as an innovation and I compare it to any other innovation, Web3 innovation is always closely related to making money. To financial instruments, because it is an amazing innovation for financial instruments. But of course, where there are financial instruments, there are people that want to make money through it. So I think that definitely makes it sometimes really hard for any kind of innovation that's not directly tied to financial innovation to evolve, because you always find people that are really knowledgeable in the space to get in and directly see the financial case, the return case only, rather than the impact case. So I think that, and the original carbon market infrastructure that is also quite rigid and not easy to innovate. So these two things coming together definitely slowed down that initial enthusiasm that everyone had in the space. So I think then for us at a certain point, we were like, because we also hired people that were all enthusiastic around Web3, right? So at a certain point, I had to talk to the people in the company and I said, guys, I love Web3, you know that. And I think it can be an amazing tool. But in the end, I just want to achieve our goal, our mission and our vision. And maybe that is not tied to Web3 anymore, because we can't innovate along the whole cycle from verifying projects, carbon reductions or carbon sequestration, like DMRV, or building bridges to registries, maybe building own registries. We just don't have the capacity to innovate along that whole value chain, but it would need to in order to use it. So we just said at a certain point, let's go back to the customer, which are corporates out there. And we always said we want to do work on a B2B level. So let's go to them and ask them really what they want. And a lot of the things that they said would have been a fit for Web3, but a lot of the infrastructure is not there yet. And we as a startup, of course, you have to think into cycles, right? You need to figure out how to make money. And we then said, okay, and I always said we are more of a Web 2.5 company. I think at the moment we're a Web 2.1 company. We still use some parts of Web 3, but in the end, it's really much Web 2, just trying to still create a trustworthy market for corporates. But on the other hand, it's all around making that usability and user friendliness of the application, a pleasant experience. But then also just being really close to the companies, to the corporates that want to buy into carbon credits and want to funnel capital into these projects. And that maybe is not even that tech heavy. There was like one realization. Maybe they don't care what kind of tech you use. Maybe, and that's what we've seen really often, is that the more tech we've created, actually the more hesitant the companies were to taking action. So we actually made we stripped like 80% of our application down and just made it so simple as possible. And that led to definitely having more impact of achieving that goal of funneling a lot of capital to climate.
Amazing, man. And those are hard decisions to make, obviously, but you've got to make them, as there's, so much stigma around the Web3 side, and you really do need to serve your customer. And if the tools and technology you're using aren't serving their needs and they're capitally intensive and they have hindrances on user experience, like, you've got to cut the fat and go with what actually works to solve these human problems. Because they're people at the end of the day, these buyers.
Definitely. Funny also, we had some people, I would definitely say 90% they joined because of the Web3 stuff, and maybe 10% because they're like really passionate about impact. But I think all of them, they're still on board, and they all just got so close to finding like more purpose in their work that they now actually don't care about the Web3 anymore, but they just think we're doing the right thing. And that makes them, feeling way more purpose working. So that has been an amazing journey as well.
Yeah, and also for you as a leader to let go of your darlings and just say, hey, this is what the customer needs, this is what the business needs. I think this is a great model of leadership that, we have to keep our eye on the prize. The outcome here is to finance climate action at scale in a meaningful way that we can verify and, ensure that capital is flowing to those farmers on the ground, like you mentioned. I'd be curious to just get a snapshot of how many companies have you guys served? What kind of volume have you guys done? Give me a sort of top level overview so we can see the level of scale that you're working at, and also that in context to the broader market as a whole.
Yeah, so our focus really is on all sorts of corporates. As I mentioned before, I think 80% of these are like small to medium-sized companies. Why is that the case? We came to the realization that a lot of the really big corporates, they over time now created their own kind of climate and also carbon teams. So they actually want to directly be connected to projects, often, not always. So they build a lot of in-house knowledge. Let's, for instance, take Microsoft. They have like 40 or 50 teams in their 40 or 50 people in their team of sustainability, and probably 10 or 15 just analyzing carbon credits. So they know where they want to invest. So I think this is a trend that we're seeing, that the bigger companies like building up that competency, that they maybe don't even want to interact with a marketplace, but rather directly go to all the project developers, which makes a lot of sense. So we have some bigger companies as customers, but most are like small to medium sized companies. And overall, we're like at more than 360 customers that we have. And that could be a company, and that's literally most of the case, is like a small to medium sized company that maybe has like 200, 300, 400 employees. And what we've seen, especially in Germany, is that they are really often family owned. So there is a different kind of incentive to have climate action. Whereas if it's a stock traded company, then it's mostly, hey, I have to make a case to the board. I have to show that there's a return of investment. And in the end, you're always interested in driving up the stock price, right? Whereas a family-owned company, they think differently. They have a huge sense of responsibility where they say, I want to leave the earth in a state that is at least as good as I lived in, or maybe even better, to hand over my company to my daughter or to my son. So they have a completely different sense of responsibility. So it has been a huge pleasure working with them because you definitely talk on a different level. So they, though, have the problem that they maybe have one single person for sustainability and they have to do everything from the reporting in Germany and Europe with the CSRD, so the corporate sustainability reporting, up to they have to talk to their supply chain, talking about different kind of sustainability topics. They have to do the footprinting, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, carbon footprinting, and they have to take care of investing into climate projects. So they basically said, Adrian, I don't have time, but I need a partner to help me investing into the right projects, and also finding a portfolio that makes sense to my company. So for instance, if they're in shipping, they rather want to invest into mangroves, whereas a food and beverage company maybe rather wants to invest into regenerative agriculture. So the things that have most impact on them or their supply chain. And then we basically figure out a perfect portfolio for them. And we have really good relationships with project developer, mostly in Africa, and everything nature-based. So we solely do nature-based projects. And this is mostly our target group that we work together and have as partners. There are a couple of bigger companies as well. There's, for instance, Siemens. There is one that we can also talk about in the new year, which is like, one of the big 20 companies in Germany. So amazing. There are also bigger ones. And for them, we mostly also look into long-term strategy. So for instance, for this one big client that's coming up, we looked into the next 5 years and said like, hey, look, they said, okay, we know what we will have to buy for the next years. Can we already secure a certain kind of supply? So in the form of offtake agreements, and it's around 10 million euros a year that they have to invest. And we basically looked into a strategy in what kind of projects, in which area. So where do they have their locations, where they maybe want to have a bigger impact, and then created that 5-year strategy and all contractual work as well with the projects on the ground. And then also looking at things that we make sure that at least like 50% of the money goes straight into the community. So we have our own kind of due diligence process now built, or like that's something that we created over the last year. And so this is basically where we stand at the moment. And the shift we also took, where we are in the beginning said like, we're just an open sea and everyone, like it says, open sea, everyone can go on the platform, log in and just access credits. We're now going more into like a white cloth experience with corporates out there.
I mean, it sounds like it's working. If you're getting somebody looking at a 5-year timeline for sourcing credits, planning that much in the future, and that kind of volume is, fundamentally significant, especially for a startup of your guys' size. So I'm really grateful to hear that you guys are getting this kind of traction, listening to the market, and doing the work at a human level to facilitate these agreements. I'd be curious to unpack just a little bit for those who may not be as familiar with these instruments. You obviously have kind of the spot market where you have supply registered and listed on your website. You use the term offtake agreement just then. And there's also, this idea of carbon futures or carbon forwards. Can you just break down a little bit of these different assets and when they're used and what you're seeing as a trend in the market today?
Totally. So, as you just mentioned, you have a spot credit. So that's basically a carbon credit or carbon project that already issued their carbon credit, for instance, with a big registry and standard, like, for instance, Gold Standard or Vera. And this credit can be directly used to be retired and can be calculated into the emission balance or emission reporting that you have. Now, and that's why there's a big trend around looking into the future, so around futures, forwards, offtake agreements. What we also, maybe it sounds stupid, but we realized that, of course, there are a lot of companies that have a net zero target. And I have the feeling that at a certain point, every company in the world will have a net zero target. We hear it all the time that a lot of the companies out there are also forced by their suppliers or forced by their off-takers. So, for instance, yesterday I talked to a company that produces herbs, and they sell it to supermarkets. And then the supermarket now said to all their suppliers, you have to have an SBTi target, so a science-based target.
All the suppliers, fascinating. The supermarket's providing that pressure. Really interesting.
Yeah, so I see the same in the automotive space, for instance. And that's the reason I'm really sure about in the next 1 or 2 years, every company will have a net zero target.
Super exciting.
In order to achieve net zero, every company has to buy carbon credits. It's not possible different, right? Because every company has a residual emission. Even if you've reduced your footprint as much as possible, and everyone should, in the end, you will still have a certain kind of emission left that you will never be able to reduce. And it's different from industry to industry, right? So what we then realize is a lot of companies, they say, for instance, net zero target in 2030, though SBTi, so Science-Based Target Initiative, says you only have to buy credits when you hit your net zero target. So a lot of the companies said, hey, I will only buy in 2030, maybe earlier, but I only have to buy from 2030. So you basically have this kind of gap from now until everyone has their net zero target where they have to buy.
Interesting.
And how do you get over that gap? Because you still want to have project financed around the world, right? Yeah. And it's not like... It's not like software that you can turn on and off from one day to another. Like nature doesn't work like that. In order to plant a tree and to also then later get a carbon credit, it takes a couple of years. So you basically now have to bridge that gap. And for that, really often these offtake agreements or forwards or futures are being used. And this is all about securing future supply. So for instance, if a company now says my net zero target is in 2030 and then I will buy credits, then they can, for instance, say in 2030, I secure an offtake agreement. And offtake agreement just says in 2030, I will pay XYZ amount, let's say 30 euros for that credit that you will produce. And then there can be different payment modalities. For instance, no prepayment or 20% prepayment or 100% prepayment. can be any amount. And based on that, of course, there's a different kind of price point. The more prepayment, the more security for the project developer. But the important thing is it helps the project developer to start with a project now, because that is the biggest finance bottleneck at the moment. If they're, for instance, then with a offtake agreement with no prepayment, what really often happens is that they go to a bank and say, for instance, hey, look, Siemens says that they will buy this credit for sure in 2030. Yeah. Can you give me funding or like a loan against that? So that happens. But then there, of course, also other ways to maybe make this an asset, a tradable asset. And that's where like forwards and futures, they're a little bit different, come into play, where you basically in forward say, I, for 100% buy, or like 100% prepayment, I buy a future credit and I want to make this tradable. And there are a couple of projects out there like Solid World that also created like a Web3 infrastructure for that, which is super important because before this was an illiquid asset that you had, which is always less valuable than a liquid asset. So basically, that's the reason there are these two markets. On one hand, buying credits now, and on the other hand, a market for future demand, which will be really big because everyone, again, has to buy these credits. Now, of course, one thing that I wanted to say is in a perfect society, of course, all the companies would offset their footprint now already. But unfortunately, we're not there. I know a lot of companies, they say like, even if my net zero goal is in 2030, I want to invest into climate already. But a lot of them say we only start then because it maybe hinders our decarbonization journey.
Yeah, you guys are unpacking so many of the intricacies of this market. I'd love to unfold a little bit around the nature-based focus. This is something I'm super convicted about, that we need nature to thrive as a species. But over the last couple of years, we've seen a pretty massive journey for nature-based solutions within the carbon market as a whole. And I'd love to get your take personally. Obviously, you visited a lot of these projects on the ground. You've seen, a lot of the press headlines and the flack. You've seen the buyers' reactions within the market. You've seen, the suppliers on the ground navigating this turbulent space. Can you give us a kind of overview of maybe first starting off with your thesis for why nature, and then unfolding what is the market for nature right now and what's the kind of transition that it's going through at the moment?
I think how I started was that I actually think in general nature needs to be funded or needs to be fundable, and somehow everyone just agreed that carbon credits is a vehicle to funnel that capital towards nature at a certain point. Yeah. So at that point, I was just like, okay, this is the best vehicle to bring capital there. Let's focus on carbon credits. I don't know why everyone agreed on that. I mean, it was Kyoto Protocol and then Paris Agreement, and the markets that have been created around that. But actually, it's not about only the CO2 that is stored, but it's around all these co-benefits that come with it, from biodiversity, from securing food supply, for instance, the shrimps that are in the mangroves or the mussels that are coming through healthy mangrove trees. All these co-benefits that are coming with it are super, super important. So that's why I'm always saying, like, I don't care what kind of vehicle it is, if it's carbon credits, biodiversity credits, or other credits, but I just want to get as much funding into nature. That's the reason I think nature-based should just be like the core of all these strategies. And that's also why we focus on it. Because even if we set up like millions of these direct air capture machines, which from the technology point of view is of course an amazing achievement, our world will still die if we can't fix nature. So that's why we then said, okay, we chose carbon credits as a vehicle, but in the end, it's just funneling capital there with all its co-benefits. So though, as you just mentioned, I think also nature-based assets had a massive roller coaster ride over this year, especially from news articles, The Guardian, talking about REDD+, so avoided deforestation projects that actually didn't really, did what they were supposed to do. So avoid a certain kind of amount of carbon, or just did completely wrong calculations on how much deforestation actually got avoided, and therefore for giving out way too many credits. And then on the other hand, also like problems around where did the money actually go. So nature-based, massive roller coaster ride. And that was one of the reasons we then also refocused, because we in the beginning said, hey, we want to have this big marketplace where everyone has access to the carbon market. But then realizing that the standards out there are just a certain kind of bar that you have to hop over. But in between these projects in a standard, like for instance, Vera, there's such a big quality difference that we just can't be just a transaction layer where everyone has access to the projects, but we have to do our own kind of quality assessment in order to restore trust into carbon markets. Because all the corporates that we talk to, they all want to invest into nature, but they're all scared of it. Correct. Like, I mean, if I read these articles and if they're right or not, if they're 50% correct or only 30% correct, it's enough to scare me off. And right so, I mean, I would be the same. So we now, and that was for me in the end, it maybe hurts in the short while, but in the end, I think it gives a massive push to innovation. And it also gives a push to corporates to actually think about quality. Whereas before, they were probably way more comfortable with just say, I buy any Vera credit, it's fine. Now they know they will be under scrutiny if they do so. So they want to have the best, and it's worth way more for them. So they now spend, I mean, an average credit now that goes for our average portfolio on our platform is like between 30 and 40 euros a credit. So it just shows you that people are now like really comfortable spending more because they know that there's a lot of risk, reputational risk mostly involved for them. So for me, in the end, it was a necessary push also to the old players to get them moving quicker. Of course, it hurts in the short term.
And I'm curious what you guys have actually developed as a framework to determine the quality of these nature-based projects. I saw Solid World release CRISP, which was, an open source structured methodology for evaluating these projects. First mangroves, and then obviously later cook stoves. You guys show the B0 rating on your website for some of the credits for which it's applicable. But how are you going about ensuring the integrity of these nature-based projects and really driving that narrative of, $30 to $40 a ton?
Yeah, so basically it's a 3-layer process. On one hand, we still only take in projects that come through a standard. It can be new standards, but like Gold Standard, Sercarbono, Eco Registry, Puro, any of these standards. Then the second layer is it needs to have a rating. So I know some credits that we have on the platform that don't have a rating yet. There we have to go a little bit deeper into our due diligence, but most credits, they need to have a rating. And then we only take any credits that is above a certain credit rating. It also depends from which category, because some projects, like for instance a biochar project, if it has a rating and rating goes from AAA to D. If a biochar project has a triple B rating, then it's already not enough. It needs to have at least an A. But for avoided deforestation, I think it also can be, for instance, a triple B rating. So it depends on that. And then the third layer is basically our own due diligence process, where we have our own climate team that also sits mostly here in Africa, in South Africa. And there we go, and it's really dependent on the project category. Of course, there are like classic things that we look at, for instance, project developers' reputation or history. So how comfortable do we feel that the project developer actually delivers on that promise? Yep. Then the country, so different kind of country risks. For instance, Kenya having set up their own kind of carbon strategy, and it's really clear that they will, for instance, not use the credits for their own national carbon goals, has a way better risk profile than, for instance, I would say Zimbabwe, where we have, for instance, had an incident around them saying we're going to use these credits for our own national goals. So we look at this.
Can you unpack that part a little bit, just because I feel like this is a really important nuance?
Yeah, definitely. So different countries, and most of the carbon projects in the world, like, I don't know, it's like 85% of projects on the global south. We focus a lot on Africa, and in Africa you have a lot of different countries with a lot of different developments, like infrastructure development, but also different development on politics. So how stable is that country? And most countries in the world, they already put up their own kind of net zero goal. So, for instance, mostly they're a little bit later than corporates. I want to be net zero until 2045. And some countries have already strategies, what that means for the projects, the carbon projects that are happening in their country. If they are allowed to use these kind of carbon credits towards their own calculation of their own kind of net zero target. Like, for instance, let's say an avoided deforestation project in Zimbabwe, does this or count towards their own goal, or can they sell these credits to the goal of a company? You can't do both, because then it's double counting. Yeah. So this is really, really important in assessing the risk. Like, for instance, what could happen is that you invest into a forward or an offtake agreement of a credit in Zimbabwe, and you already paid for it. But then 5 years later, suddenly Zimbabwe says, no, sorry guys, I will now calculate it for my own emission goals. Then you as a company basically paid for that, but more as of a donation towards the Zimbabwean national goal rather than to your own goals. You're not allowed to use it. So that's a huge risk, huge investor risk.
And I guess that's where you guys are coming in to provide this value now, not just being a marketplace and an interface for everyone to access, but also doing the work to build these relationships with the best project developers on the ground, really understand the national strategies, and ensure that buyers are getting what they're sold and on the horizons to meet their objectives.
Yeah, exactly. And then also other things, like, for instance, figuring out how much money goes to the communities, what other co-benefits coming through this project, and so on. And it's really, individual per project. I think in the end, we also realized on our platform, and that's a funny insight, the more projects we got on the platform, the less we actually sold. So it just is this old kind of psychological theme around, if I have too many choices, I will not make a choice at all. And that was quite interesting to see. So next year, the marketplace will even get smaller and smaller. And we only want to have like maybe 2 handful or 3 handful of projects that we can really vouch for. Because the biggest thing, again, coming back to this discussion, is that companies are really scared to take action, even though they want to. So it's sometimes they even say, I want to, but to be honest, I'd rather not do anything because then no one can attack me. And that shouldn't be the case. So then we also said, what can we actually do? And we now created something called the Senken guarantee for all the projects that went through our vetting process, that if anything happens with the project, that we basically exchange it with an equivalent quality credit. So it's a little bit like the PayPal buyer's guarantee or buyer's protection or eBay buyer protection. Because we're really listening to the customers and thinking like, how can we get them to climate action instead of just waiting it out? And this is basically the process and the new kind of guarantee that we now created. And for that, we basically buy our own kind of buffer pool of credits from the transaction fees that we get from the projects, or part of the transaction fee.
Fascinating. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure that's engendering confidence among buyers. It is also just frustrating that the press has such a keen eye to attack people who are taking climate action, most oftentimes because they want to do good in the world and they want to fulfill their obligation as a corporation to, make the world a better place. And yet companies who don't have targets, who aren't doing anything, aren't being eviscerated, they're not being torn down. And it really feels a very obtuse way to go about trying to solve this complex global coordination challenge we face.
Yeah, there's actually no risk of not doing anything right now, which is crazy. So yeah, I think a lot of the companies, they also didn't do it on purpose. They were just like, hey, I trust Vera and the other standards. Yeah, so if it's Vera, it must be good. Which for a functioning market, you need way more things like ratings. You need maybe even insurance products and so on. So with the market evolving, we can build up that trust, but it's always easier to lose trust than to create trust. So it's a journey.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I'm curious to see where you think this all goes. Like over the next 2 or 3 years, if you guys are maximally successful, what is the change that you're able to make in the world? And what is this ecosystem that you're building end up looking like?
So success would be to bridge that gap that I mentioned before, the gap of companies maybe only really offsetting in a couple of years, and figure out how to bridge that gap of finance, right? Because the projects still need money. So how can we maybe get this together? And a couple of things that we're currently thinking about is a tool, for instance, that will come out in 1 or 2 weeks, is where companies can put in the net zero target, and they just have to put in their email address, and it gives a little bit of a benchmark of their footprint. And then it shows them how much they could save if they already invest into offtake agreements now, rather than just buying spot in, for instance, 230. And with that, we can save a lot of security for projects. So that would be one of the goals. Yeah, it's this Senken AI scorecard.
Super cool.
And this should, success really would be to bridge that funding gaps, to still get finance and a lot of capital to climate projects. And on the other hand, also getting companies to make trustworthy commitments now. And that would really be something for us.
Totally. And it sounds like you've got quite a lot of parts that were missing in the market. You've built a marketplace with very high quality supply, surfacing the insights, the rating systems, the scoring, but also having the business development expertise on the ground in Africa to ensure that these nature-based solutions are doing what they say, and also being financed with integrity, with consciousness towards local community, local environment, etc. And it feels as though the scorecard could also just be yet another contribution to making it easier for that one person in a 200 or 300 size company who's juggling all of these different parts and might not have the capacity to do a super finite measurement of their carbon footprint. But what you guys can offer is probably good enough to get started and begin making an impact. And with the guarantee behind them, they now know that even if in the, very, very unlikely edge case, something happens with the project, you've got a buffer pool supply to be able to replace them with credits. And I guess all these things together really do engender confidence for people to just say, okay, let's take action. It doesn't have to be, absolutely perfect to the myopic detail. Nature isn't, but we know that we need nature. And there are leaders all around the world in these corporations who are saying, we believe in nature. We believe in leaving this world a better place for our children, whether we're passing on to our company, to our daughter, our son. We all have a future together in this. Is there anything else in this that you see a kind of missing link and a missing component to how to really build out this market with confidence for both the supply side and the demand side?
First of all, I couldn't have put it any better. Love it. And it's also really maybe to make a case to the board, right? Because really often you first need to have a sign off from the board to actually start the sustainability journey. But really often that means, I don't know what my footprint is. Is it 1,000 tons? Is it 1 million tons? How big has our journey to be, right? And we basically want to provide the tools to get these journeys kicked off as easy as possible. So they can put in the email, they go to the board and say like, guys, if we don't do anything, we have to spend this and this amount on credits. We have this and this kind of footprint. We're also going to launch a tool, a marginal abatement cost analysis. So it basically shows them, based on their industry, what are the low-hanging fruits for emission reductions, also for free. So I think we're really trying to give them the tools for free to make a case to get started, because that's, I think, the most important thing. Then for the other thing, what is still missing? I think a big unlock would be that, for instance, science-based target initiatives would say, okay, we give you guidelines on how to use carbon credits now, because it's not science-based to only invest into climate when you're already at your net zero goal. How science-based is it to not taking out carbon out of the atmosphere now, but rather 5 or 10 years ago? Nothing is science-based around it. I know that they came together at COP with also the voluntary carbon market integrity, VCMI and ICVCM, Integrity Council for Carbon Markets, with SBTI to figure out how to provide these guidelines. But I think this would already be something that would be great, because companies, they come to us and say like, SBTI says we only have to buy in 2030. And I was like, yeah, but to be honest, you have a footprint now. Like, why shouldn't you try to at least partly offset it? It's not science-based, so to say. So I think would be an amazing unlock if these kind of standard bodies would give more guidelines on how to use credits, but also guidelines maybe what is quality in a credit. So I think this would be something that would be, definitely accelerating for us.
Totally, because you could imagine the cumulative effect of all of those companies waiting to, buy credits and finance climate action till 2030 or 2035 versus taking action now. And obviously the net benefit is taking action. I guess it's just the insistence on, avoiding emissions and reducing emissions internally as, a penultimate priority, because that really is the pathway. Because we can't solve this problem purely through carbon offsets alone. We need to fundamentally change our supply chains and our business models. And so I think it's probably a difficult balance between those, different levers of action.
I think like a high quality credit can just be an amazing internal carbon pricing tool. So if every carbon or ton of carbon that you have to offset will cost you, I don't know, between 50 and 100 euros, then you will do a lot to not buy that carbon credit, but rather reduce your footprint internally, which with a lot of things is cheaper than that. So that's the reason there are some studies around that people that integrate that into their strategy, carbon credits as a pricing tool, internal carbon pricing tool, that they decarbonize twice as fast. So I think for that, it's just an amazing tool.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I hadn't quite conceived of that kind of internal function, but I guess if you're out there, pricing carbon and saying this is what it's worth, this is what we're willing to pay for this quality and standard, suddenly everything else internally has this, financial cost and reflective lens. And obviously the political capability of implementing a carbon tax is effectively impossible in our current day and age, but we're seeing this kind of inbuilt, mini political environment inside corporations as they're upholding these climate commitments internally. We've covered a lot of ground today, Adrian, and I know you've got a lot on your plate coming up to the end of the year. I'd love to do a little bit of, tone shift and just ask how you've navigated this journey as a founder. I remember when we first met and hearing you go through your first raise, seeing you launch the prototype, it's been a massive, epic journey and probably not the easiest one at times. What have you done to maintain center and to be grounded throughout this whole process? Do you have any kind of insights or offerings to share for people who are, similar stage of their journey?
So definitely when we met, I think I didn't have a single gray hair, and now they're here. They're coming. They're coming.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You have aged 10 years, bro. Me too.
What should I say, man? It's been, I think it felt really purposeful, the work, but it definitely strained me a lot. But basically, for me, what helped, I have to admit, I went to, with the first research coming to South Africa, I met my now fiance, and she being South African was a step, and introducing me, because she comes from that small fisher village, definitely got me really, really grounded in, I would say, not only nature, but also living in South Africa. And then also finding a lot of new things. For instance, I just told you before, going into the ocean every day, snorkeling with the sea kelp. I'm a big fan of sea kelp as a nature habitat. So I'm also excited for what kind of credits come from that space, but it's really hard, the science behind it. Doing a lot of hiking here in the area. And so that has been one thing, just trying to spend as much time as possible in nature, which I haven't done that much before, because before I lived in Berlin. Finding nature over there is quite hard. I mean, there are parks. It's in general a green city, but it's different. So that has been great for me. Then what else? I think if I would have started a startup in any other space, maybe I wouldn't have been here. I think feeling that kind of purpose. So whenever I'm down and I'm like, shit, this is not gonna work, I always come back and say but if I make it work, this and this will happen. This and this is the impact I will have. So maybe let's just push one more time. And that last time, that helped me really often to go to another dark time, but it pushed me another 3 months, which then again worked out really well. And then you have after a certain time, it feels like you just need your kind of rocks in life that you can cling to when you're down, when you're in this phase of thinking everything will fail, nothing will work out, which you can have really often in the nature space. And for me, it has been definitely my partner. It has been nature. And it also, for me as a CEO, really often has been the people that I'm on the journey with. I want them all to succeed in their life, whatever success will look like for them. But I mentioned in the beginning that a lot of them that before were more techies are now also nature lovers. So for them, success is probably really close to what my success looks like. Finding these rocks is definitely something that you have to figure out for yourself in order to go through the dark times.
Beautiful, man. Well, I got a lot of respect for you, bro. You guys are doing amazing work, and it seems like you're doing it with a really steady gait, and you've made incredible progress and are actually financing climate action in a meaningful way with projects that you care about and that you can show up and really verify are doing the good in the world that they say they are. And I think, many people in this next cycle will look to you guys for inspiration and hope. And I'm really grateful that I've had this time together today. I'm curious for people listening, either on the supply side or on the demand side, who want to get in touch, how can they reach you? And what's the best way to connect?
So really easy. LinkedIn definitely always works. And it's probably the easiest to find me, and then also text me. I will always reply really, really quickly. Of course, email or just through our webpage. There are a lot of contact us buttons. I think it should be really easy. If you want to find us, you will find us for sure. Then, but also from my side, John, thanks a lot for all the work. I think it has been a journey for both of us. When we met, more than 2 years ago. It's crazy, but I think this whole kind of contribution that you did to the ReFi space with all the work has been valuable. And I still remember when you started with also ReFi DAO, I was like, DAOs, they don't work. but I love ReFi, the thought about it. But I always thought it would just stay in this tech bubble. But I actually just had an interview today, just before this, with a big newspaper. And they were like, tell me about ReFi. And I was like, what do you know about ReFi? So this whole thing around ReFi transcendent above the whole technology bubble, which is really hard to achieve. And I think you're really one of the people pushing it. So definitely thanks for your work as well.
Dude, it's an honor, brother. It's an honor to contribute to this incredible movement together. I think, this is just the beginning, really. It is. That initial wave of excitement and enthusiasm and capital flowing in 2021 was really, I think, a glimmer that got a lot of us excited. But at the end of the day, every single person, every single business, every single nation needs to figure out how to transition into this regenerative life in balance with one another, with ourselves, with nature. And I think we're witnessing the choppy waters of this transition. But if we're going to live on planet Earth for many more centuries to come, many more generations, we've got to find a way. And if your story of holding on to those rocks is anything like what our human journey will be, I got a lot of hope, man. And I know there's a lot of badass leaders like you out there. So, let's fucking go, man. ReFi for the win.
And let's go.
Thanks. I'll let you roll, man. 2 interviews in one day. You got to go out, get some actual work done. But absolute pleasure, Adrian. Have a great rest of your day, and look forward to touching base in the new year.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a good one. Bye.
See you, man. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. I would be so incredibly grateful if you had a couple moments to leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This really helps us reach incredible guests and to gain traction with audience members just like you, who are looking for the right levers to make a contribution to this unfolding symphony of regeneration. Appreciate your time, and always do let us know what you think. If there's anything we can do to improve, drop us a note in the comments and we'll listen in and figure out how we can make this a service to this unfolding movement of regeneration. Thanks.